Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. Right now, I'm working on some interviews with some of BeMo's successful students, and so I'm really excited to have Hannah here with me today. Hannah, thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Great. So what are you finishing up or working on right now, or what's in your immediate future before you move on to med school?
Well, I've been working as a nurse for the last year, and I'm taking the summer before I go into medicine to travel to Italy for a few weeks.
That's so amazing. I'm so glad that you have the opportunity to do something so great with that time before everything starts just becoming kind of chaotic again. That's got to feel really good.
Yeah,
That's
I'm
amazing.
really
How long are you going?
just under 3 weeks.
That's awesome. That's amazing. Eat all the food there and report back and tell me how amazing it was afterwards. In terms of applying to med school, was this your first time applying? And how many schools did you end up applying to?
Yes, this was my first time applying, and I actually only applied to one school. I wrote my MCAT on the last possible day, so this was the kind of only school accepting them, and it worked out because this was my first choice anyways. But yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. That's like a fairy tale of med school applications. This will be told of in the lore of this day for generations to come. Oh, that has to feel really good though.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, actually, I identify. I didn't do med school. I did grad school and PhD. And when I applied for my MA, I sort of did the same thing. I applied to one school. I applied late in the cycle. I just sort of threw all my eggs into one basket and said it's either this or it's something completely different. And fortunately, that worked out for me. And fortunately, it worked out for
Yeah.
you. So that's amazing.
Yeah.
So where were you ultimately accepted?
The University of Saskatchewan.
That's great. And you're from that area?
Yeah, I've been out in BC for the last 5 years, but I grew up in Saskatchewan, so it's like moving back home.
Oh, that's wonderful. Or do you have family and friends there still?
Yeah.
Oh, that has to feel so good. That's usually we think of going to school, you have to go away from all of those things. It must be a really different feeling like you're returning to all of that.
Yeah, yeah, it's a very different feeling from the first time going to school to this time.
I'll bet. Well, those support systems are so incredibly important when the chaos and stress of med school start piling on. So you're going to have some great resources available to you, and to be so familiar with the area. There's that nostalgia that comes with that, and
Yeah.
that can just feel so warm and cozy, right? That's awesome. So you said you worked for a nurse, or you've been working as a nurse for a little while. When did you decide to pursue medicine? What was the sort of turning point for you?
I actually decided as soon as I got into the workforce and started working as a nurse, I really enjoyed it, but I always kind of felt that I would like the role of diagnosing and deciding on a treatment a little bit more. I wanted just a little bit more from my career. So within the first 2 weeks of starting nursing, I started studying for the MCAT and then applied.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, that's great. That takes a lot of self-knowledge to understand that you want and are able to take on that level of autonomy and leadership and things like that.
Yeah. And the responsibility, that's kind of why I didn't choose to go into medicine off the bat, was I didn't feel that I could handle that responsibility and I didn't know if I wanted it. And then as soon as I started working without that responsibility, I knew that that's what I wanted.
That's wonderful. A
Yeah.
lot of people think that, med school has to be the very first thing that you do. If you're going to pursue it, that has to be where you go. But I think that's such a great lesson that sometimes you have to get into the working world and see what that's really like before you really know
Mhm.
what you want and what you can carry and make those additional steps from there. So that's
Yeah.
awesome. We see a lot of younger individuals, not too young, but younger individuals, starting to realize that there's always been this intense pressure for school to be one continuous thing without that disruption. But you gained so much from that experience, and it looks like that was your sort of takeaway from it.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So, in applying, what did you find was the most challenging part of the application or interview process?
I found the waiting to be the most difficult part. It's easy
That's
to kind of, well, not easy, but I find it easier to work hard when I know there's something to work towards. And then eventually with the application process, it's just waiting, right? So I found that to be the most challenging part.
That's completely fair. There's a lot of waiting. And yeah, like you said, you have to put so much work in and you don't know what the end result is going to be. And that can really cause a crisis of motivation and things like that. But you're obviously able to pull through it. So that's wonderful. Um, so you worked with BeMo on your interview prep. What was it like? And was there anything that sort of surprised you about the process?
It was great. I really enjoyed it. I felt like I got a lot out of it. Going into the interview prep course, I took it because I've never had an interview in my life. I was hired without a job interview, so I didn't feel like I had anything to prepare me. And I felt like getting feedback from experts made all the difference in my first time applying. So I found it to be super beneficial, and I really enjoyed working with BMO in that sense.
That's great. I'm glad to hear that. And yeah, regardless of whether you go into a job before going into med school, very few of us have that intense experience with interviewing and that sort of sense of the unknown. You have no idea what it's even going, what the setup's going to be like, what they're going to ask you, and that can feel really destabilizing for a lot of people. So I'm glad you were able to sort of develop that foundation so you felt like you have some firmer ground to stand on.
Yeah.
So, what have you learned from this process? If you had one piece of advice to offer other applicants, what would that be?
To prepare with experts. I found I practiced with friends and family, and even just the difference in feedback. Going into the interview, I felt confident and I actually enjoyed the process. I enjoyed all the different interviews and getting a chance to talk about different issues because I felt confident in my abilities to answer the question. I didn't feel like I was stumbling through the structure of how to answer them. I felt like I could really get my point across and be effective in that. So
Mhm.
my advice would be to practice with experts, whether like a pre-med group or with BeMo. That's how you gain the confidence in the interview.
I think you made two really great points there. First, a lot of people will try to prepare with family and friends, and once you have a foundation to work off of, that can be effective, but they're never going to get past the fact that they love you and that their opinion cannot be objective. It cannot be unbiased. And so getting someone who doesn't know you and who's able and whose job it is to give you that objective feedback can be so important. And I also love that you said that eventually you got to actually enjoy the process. Um,
Yeah.
that's another shift that we tend to see students going through. You start with this thing that's so apprehensive or that brings so much apprehension and stress and uncertainty. But once you realize how to articulate your own narrative in a compelling and engaging way, it actually becomes something fun that you can do. And
Mhm.
so I love that that was your experience.
Yeah, I actually really enjoyed the interview process. I didn't find it intimidating once I was actually in the interview, which I didn't expect before beginning prep.
Yeah, that's an interesting experience as well. Yeah, one of the things I try to tell students is, if you're going to the interview, chances are they want to see you do well, right? You have,
Yeah,
and it's the same thing if you're an academic and you're going to conferences or, presenting in front of your class. The audience wants you to do well. They don't want to see you crash and burn. They want to see you thrive and get through it and bring up some interesting ideas for them to think about because you're dealing with
yeah,
people who like to engage ideas. And so that's a huge shift in perspective that a lot of people, myself included, have a hard time getting over. We think that
yeah.
everybody wants to see the spectacle of disaster, and that's not always the case. So, you're about to take this amazing trip and then get started on the hard work. What are you most excited about as you begin this next part of your educational journey?
I'm excited to be back in school. I'm excited to be learning. I think that's what I'm most excited for is to just learn a whole new set of knowledge and hopefully find different passions that I have in other areas. I'm excited to kind of explore what my options are going forward.
Mhm. That's a really great attitude to have. And, I think it's funny. There's nothing that makes you want to go back to school more than not being in school. And that seems often really weird to people who have never not been in school. But
Yeah.
eventually, yeah, when you develop that passion for knowledge
Yeah.
and learning and pushing yourself, there's something so special and unique about the process of education that takes place ideally within schools, not always in schools, but ideally. And
Mhm.
so being able to not feel like you're being dragged in every day, or, not every single day. There will still be days where you feel like you're being dragged in, but you still know that there's an excitement and a passion behind that is a really important perspective shift to go through, I think.
Yeah.
So, what do you hope to accomplish as a practicing professional? Where do you see yourself in 10 years?
I'm trying to keep my mind open. My ultimate goal at this point is I would like to do family practice and eventually open a clinic, but I'm also open to other options because I knew it was the same going into nursing. I had an idea of where I wanted to be, and I ended up loving somewhere else. So I'm
Mhm.
trying to get too set, but I would love to be able to kind of have that practice and work with families. And
Mhm. What draws you to the idea of family medicine?
I really like the idea of a continuing relationship with patients. I like that you get to follow patients through their lifespan and kind of help them in that sense. I really like that connection and the rapport that you're able to build.
Mhm. Yeah, that's beautiful. It's a really lovely motivation for pursuing this. Like you said, it may
Mhm.
change. You never know at this stage. There are so many unknown unknowns, like things that you
Yeah.
don't know that you don't know.
Yep.
So yeah, that you're open about it, but I think that's such a great motivation. And thinking about what that
Mhm.
motivation genuinely is so important in terms of just shaping your overall trajectory and making sure that you're satisfied with the choices that you've made. That's great. Well, Kelsey, any final words or anything else that you'd like to add?
I would like to say that I did not expect to get in on my first application. And I think that 90% of that was BeMo, feeling confident in the interview process and being prepared and kind of knowing what to expect without ever having been in that situation. So I am very grateful and thankful to have found BeMo and had that experience.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Just on a human level, I'm an educator at my core. That's what I was trained to do. That's what I did for most of my life. And I do instructional stuff through BeMo as well. And it just makes me happy to hear students say that the things that we are able to do are able to highlight their best assets and help their voice come through most effectively. So you can't get better feedback than that. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Well, that's it for this interview. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and stay tuned for another one. We've got more in the schedule. So take care. Thanks so much for your time, and we'll see you next time.